layers and layers and layers. So we've been talking about that. And then I've invited my friend, Maya, now am I saying that right? Maya,
Yes.
uh, Golden from Tyler, Texas. And she's written the book. I've already held it up, The Return Trip. But like I said, she's one of the few that has talked about uh, and taken ownership of how her adult life was affected by the abuse. So it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Maya to you. I've asked her if she will spend some time maybe telling you her story. You know, we in a 12-step program, we tell our story by what it was like, a little bit about what it was like in the past, what happened to us, and how our life is today. So she's got quite a story, but Maya's one of those that has not stayed stuck in her story. Some, and not everyone, but some will say they will become their story. And what she's done is she has taken her story and has started helping others with the same similar story. So, Maya, welcome, and I would look forward to what you have to say this morning.
Thank you, Tennie, and to Cam for having me join. I'm truly honored. It is a full circle moment for me because I was able to write The Return Trip, my memoir, in large part because of the help that I received at Shades of Hope. And I am eternally grateful for the work that I did. I spent years on a therapist sofa with cognitive therapy, and this is never a knock against cognitive therapy. I still have weekly appointments now, but it wasn't until we started doing some of the body-based healing methods, the family of origin sculpting, really getting to the root of the trauma that I had that unlocking that was able to help me move forward. As Tenny said, my name is Maya Golden. I live in Tyler, Texas currently. I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. I grew up in the Garland area, and I am a wife. I am a mother. I am an autism mom, and I am an author, freelance journalist, and the founder of the One in Three Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization in East Texas that serves survivors of sexual trauma that have little to no income. And what we do is we connect them with support services or some of those therapy services that I mentioned that are beyond cognitive therapy. We do provide regular therapy sessions, but we also do things such as EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization, trauma release exercises, other brain gym, and some other body-based healing methods because I realize there's a book if you're not only interested in the return trip, but there's also the book that you might be familiar with called The Body Keeps Score. And what I learned through Tenny and the work that I did at Shades of Hope and what I've learned through my healing journey is that it's not just my brain that remembers what I went through, it's my body. And a little bit of what I'm going to talk about this morning is truly what happens when we develop core beliefs at a very young age that we exist for other people, that our lives, our bodies, that we don't have autonomy over our own bodies. And that is such a difficult thing to grapple with at any age, but especially when you're 5 years old and you are in the stages of developing the beliefs of how you and perspectives of how you will look at the world for the rest of your life. So for me, I didn't grow up with some harsh backstory. My parents were working class, middle class Americans. We had a three-bedroom home, lived in the suburbs, all of that. I grew up in the 80s, very much an 80s child. And for the most part, you would probably look at it on paper and think that I had a wonderful childhood. And the truth of the matter was at age 5, I experienced the first molestation and sexual abuse at the hands of a relative. And it was during the summer before I started kindergarten, so I wasn't yet in school. I wasn't really around a lot of other children. I am the youngest and the grandbaby of the family by a lot, by about 7 years. So I was very isolated. And that isolation of not going to school and yet not starting kindergarten yet, being at home when this abuse started during the summer months, and just starting to learn about the world, it was basically a recipe for disaster mentally and emotionally. But I, again, grew up in a house that, my parents championed reading. They championed learning, education. So I was a very creative child. I had a very vivid imagination. But one of the things that I declared, and I've had people ask me and question if this is really something a 5-year-old would do, but it is honestly something that I did. I declared that I was going to be perfect in my mind. I made the mental commitment at 5 years old that I was not going to fail at anything, that I was going to be the smartest, I was going to be the best daughter, I was going to be the prettiest, I was going to be the best student, I was going to excel at everything because in my mind, already at 5, if I was those things, then I wasn't dirty, then I would be enough. And so I started to develop this belief system about validation coming through perfectionism and achievement and became a high achiever. The abuse continued through the age of 11 by this relative, but I also experienced abuse at the hands of other predators, teenage boys in my neighborhood when I was before the age of 10, some incidents at school as well. And when those things continue to happen to you and you're again navigating the world and trying to understand the world, the belief for me developed again that I exist for the pleasure of other people. I exist for the gratification of other people. And I internalized that so much. But also, what else formed was dissociative disorders. I became very good at when the trauma would happen, when the molestations would take place, being able to take myself mentally out of the moment and not be present for what was happening to my body. I could escape. I could go somewhere else and then I could pack that trauma away and put it away and go on about my day as if, any other child. I'd go on playing or I'd use my easy bake oven or whatever I was doing. I had a Teddy Ruxpin that it was my big companion. All of those things. I was just on the outside for anyone who was watching, I was a normal child, but I had compartmentalized all of this abuse, years of abuse from a relative, these incidents with other boys, and they would happen and I would just file them away. And as I described in the book, it became at first sort of a suitcase stuffed with secrets. And then it was a closet full of secrets that I was bolting the door on. And then that closet became a warehouse. And it had nothing but files of trauma that I vaulted up, blocked out, latched up, and was not going to talk about. And so for the next few years of my life, most of my teenage years and moving through adolescence, that perfectionistic drive is what carried me. I was a straight A student. I was taking all advanced placement classes. Uh, when I graduated, they put a paragraph next to every graduating senior's name that lists all the organizations that they were a part of. Mine was 8 lines long. I did everything that I could to fill the void of not feeling like I was enough. But something else happened very early on. And I think that this is something that we don't talk about as society, especially with how easy it is to access it now, as opposed to when I was growing up in the late 80s and early 90s. But I had an experience and an exposure to pornography by the age of 9. And like a lot of kids, I found a stash in the house and I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking at, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be looking at it when I found it. And then it became something that was familiar. In the book that I write, that because I had been molested, because I had been sexually abused, that I related to what I saw on the screen. And no child should relate to that. No child should have that knowledge. So again, I'm going to school. I'm making straight A's. I'm doing all of the things at school. I'm already writing for the school paper in the fifth grade. And then I would come home in the afternoons at 9 and 10 years old, and I was looking at pornography and had no idea how detrimental that would eventually become. As I grew up and got older and became an adult, I would hear all the jokes all the time. Well, everybody looks at porn, was what I would hear. It's a however many billions of dollars industry. You're not the only one looking at it. And so there was this justification to it. But the problem was that it was so debilitating and I didn't recognize it. So I didn't have my outcry with my family of telling them about the abuse or what I experienced until I was 19 years old, almost 20. And I had immersed myself in the online community at the time. It was kind of the early days of the internet. And I became a part of a digital fandom for a boy band of all things. If you guys can remember when the NSYNC Backstreet Boys kind of craze was happening at the early 2000s, well, I was an 18-year-old and I dove right into that and that fandom and parasocial relationships and sort of this mania and obsession. And they became this thing that was a positive for me because I was able to escape through that. I was able to numb myself from being at college. I went to Texas A&M. I am a proud Aggie. And I will say, though, that I spent my time in my dorm room, closed away from the world, immersed in this online community, talking to these other fans, basically obsessing. And it was a numbing mechanism. The more that I could talk about them, I didn't have to focus on being sad or being isolated or the depression that was setting in. The other thing was that being in college and being in a dorm room and having a roommate that wasn't there most of the time, I had easy access now to pornography. And what was something that I was a covert activity when I was a teenager at home, I didn't really have to hide it that much in college because I was there by myself and we had the high speed internet at the time. And so it was right there at my fingertips and I was alone. And so it went from something that I looked at maybe once a week to daily, to sometimes 3 times a day. And again, I wasn't recognizing that this was a manifestation of the abuse that I experienced, as well as a numbing mechanism. So it was two different things sort of colliding with each other. And all this time, I'm getting these messages from home that are conflicting. Growing up in Texas, growing up in the South and the Bible Belt, we hear a lot of stories that are, focus on books, not boys, is what I was told. And I was going to be that good girl because, again, I had vowed I was going to be the perfect daughter and the perfect student. So I didn't date and wasn't allowed to date when I was in high school, which was a very mixed message because I knew that I was being sexually abused, but I wasn't allowed to date. Or, as I wrote in the book, I say I was allowed to operate a 3-ton vehicle and drive the streets of the Metroplex, but I couldn't go to a movie with a boy. And it sort of reiterated, and it's not to demonize my parents for making that decision. I understood now in life where that was coming from. We had a lot of teen pregnancy in our family and a lot of lives, early marriage, all of those things that had been changed by having relationships young. And so my parents were trying to keep me from that, but I was keeping from them the abuse. And when I was immersed in this online community online, I became friends with these girls. They were my lifelines because I wasn't the popular girl that I had been in high school. I wasn't in college. I was isolated. I wasn't joining organizations. I was going to class and I was coming back to the dorm room, to talk about a boy band and to watch pornography. Those were my activities. And it was one of the girls that I made friends with through that online community that encouraged me to make my outcry. An outcry is when you speak up and a child usually tells someone about the abuse that they've experienced. And she was the one And I'll tell you what the catalyst for it was that my relative that had done the most abuse in my life became a parent themselves. And when they had a child that was a girl, I just could not imagine that girl growing up in that household and enduring possibly what I had. And I expressed this concern to this girl online. She was one of the first people I ever told that I had been abused, and she encouraged me to tell my parents. And I called my mom and I asked her to get online because it was not something that I could vocalize. Again, I was used to keeping secrets. And so the way that I couldn't express myself verbally, and sometimes trauma takes our words. And I had no idea how to say to my mom, this person that you let in our house was abusing me. I didn't know how to say that. So I asked her to come online and I wrote it out in a chat. We were in an instant messaging chat and I typed it out to her. And I'm very blessed because my family immediately believed me. There was never a doubt in their mind that this had happened, that I would make this up. So immediate action was taken. The relative was ostracized, and we don't have any contact with that person. And but to say that it did not take a toll on my family is a lie. It took tremendous toll on my parents, on their marriage, on their relationship with me, because they felt, and I don't like to speak for them, but they will tell you that they felt that they didn't protect me. And one of the things that I worked with Tennie on was the fact that I did not fault them for that because I kept it such a secret. But I think part of me wanted them to see. I wanted someone so desperately to see that something was not right, that something was wrong. But I had done this really great work of putting on this veneer of everything's okay, everything's fine, I'm a high achiever, I get the job done, the grades were good, all of those things. I graduate from college, I enter a career in television, and it's feeding the perfectionist monster. Because if you think about television and you think about especially local TV news, think about how our local news anchors appear, their appearance, their hair is perfect, their outfits are perfect. Everything about them from head to toe is shiny and strong, and they can convey a message, and they have the charming smiles. And when you're in the news media, you're and people are inviting you into their homes. So they feel like they know you, they feel like they can trust you, and there's a certain level of odd celebrity that goes with being a local news media person. And I thrived in that career. I initially did general news and I covered traumatic events. But the thing that made me great at covering traumatic events, things like mass shootings, fatal car accidents, murders, those things that I went to cover as a crime reporter, my body was already used to shutting down emotion and focusing on the task at hand. So, because of that trauma experience that I had, because of dissociative disorders, I made for a really great reporter. I had an award winning career, and then it started to take its toll because when you push yourself to be the best and you have this drive, you're constantly trying to top yourself. So, my next challenge, I moved from doing the news reporting to sports reporting and sideline reporting. And I was the first female sports director in this part of this market in this East Texas. And so there was a tremendous amount of pressure on me as a female, as a woman in sports, to not only pave the way, but to be confident and for to earn people's trust. So I saw that just as another perfectionistic challenge. It was another way for me to prove to myself again, if I'm up there and I'm doing this and I'm doing something that hasn't been done before, then I'm enough, then I'm worthy enough. And it's validation. And what ultimately happened was burnout. And I don't mean burnout to the point of, oh, I just need a vacation and I can go away for 7 days and I'll be okay. It was burnout to the point where I had so much anger even walking into the building. I had anger when I woke up in the morning because I had this manic obsession with trying to gain as much information as I could, checking email, talking to coaches, looking at the news headlines for that morning before my feet even hit the floor. And what was also going on with this was that perfectionistic drive for achievement was also translating to identity and physical appearance. So I was taking colon cleansers, I was yo yo dieting and exercising, and feeling this need to be thin on television as a sportscaster, feeling this tremendous need to appear perfect. And again, when you're burning the candle that intensely, it burned out. And my crash and burn was to get out of television altogether. And I was out of the industry for a number of years. I worked a desk job. I was miserable. I am not a person, although I'm a writer now, I'm not a person who's meant for a 9 to 5 corporate sort of job. That's not me. And what I learned while I was doing this job was that I started to seek escape even more. At this point, I'm married and on my way to becoming a mother. And I started to have the first online relationship that I had with someone while I was married. And I knew that it was inappropriate. I knew that this person was asking for images of me or asking me to send them things that I wasn't comfortable with. But every time that we would have an interaction, I wasn't conscious of it, but that child came back, that child that didn't have a voice, that felt muted, that didn't know how to say no. Even though it wasn't what I wanted, I still felt compelled to comply. And so I became immersed in my marriage in a few online relationships. Pornography became another escape again. And even after the birth of my child, I still continued this behavior. I would still go into chat rooms because I had severe postpartum depression, and being with a newborn, I was exhausted and I just sought escape. I was seeking to disassociate as best as I could. And the way that I knew how to do that was through sex, through engaging in sex chat, through looking at pornography, to talking to these strangers and doing things that I found to be morally compromising to myself, that things that I would never condone in real life, but acting out online for someone else. And ultimately, I reached a breaking point where all of those things, all of those different personalities of Maya began to combat with one another. There was the mother, there was the wife, there was the former reporter, and then there was this survivor and this child that was she wanted a seat at the table, and I wasn't letting her talk. I wasn't letting her have a voice. And I had been suicidal before. And in this particular case, I actually had a suicide plan. This was not just the ideology of it. I've struggled with suicide ideology. And even sometimes now, I'll be honest about it, it still rears its head with those intrusive thoughts. But I had a true suicide plan. I had the pills, I had gone to the pharmacy and gotten the prescription. I had a bottle of Jose Cuervo Gold under the car seat, and I planned to go to my parents' house and take my life. And it was not a thought, it was a demonstrative statement that I was going to do this. My head was set on this. And then through a moment that I call divine intervention, or as Tennie says, the God of her understanding and my understanding as well, I saw something that gave me pause. And I also thought about my son and the life that my son would have without me. And a lot of my own childhood trauma as a parent is trying to shield him from trauma. And all I could think about was that I was about to inflict this pain on him, because one day all he would know, he was only about 1.5 at the time, but one day his mama was there and she wasn't, and that stuck with me. And in the book I detail it a lot more, and I don't want to give all of that away, but that was the saving grace in the moment that I decided I couldn't go on this way and that I didn't really want to kill myself. And I went to therapy. That was a Saturday. I went to therapy that Monday. And my therapist, my counselor, gave me a post-it note that said Shades of Hope. And she had had a client that had been to Shades of Hope before, and she was recommending it to me because she was basically saying, your level of trauma is so extensive, you really need to do some deep work. And she was worried that I wasn't going to make it. And to be honest, I was worried that I wasn't going to make it. And so a few months went by. And from that incident of the suicide plan to actually entering Shades of Hope, and that was when I met Tennie, and that was when I met Kim. And I had no idea what to expect when I got there. I, in the book, I write that, if you think about treatment centers and you think about treatment facilities, I think I had in my mind that it was going to be like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and there was going to be a Nurse Ratched, and there were going to be syringes and gurneys, and I was going to be strapped to something. And so I get there, and there's these homes and a bed, and it's very, there's these shade trees and walking spaces. And I was like, okay, where's the catch? There's bars on the window or something somewhere, but no. And I did a 6-day intensive. And a lot of people will say that it seems like an unconventional method for treatment, but I am alive in 2024 because of that 6-day intensive. And all of the things that I had done prior to that weren't working for me. All the numbing mechanisms, all the dieting, all the exercising, all the self-help books, all the, you know, trying to have a positive outlook and saying affirmations and doing all those things that they tell you to do. I was doing all of that, and it wasn't enough because that belief system that I said earlier, that 5-year-old developed a belief system that her body wasn't her own, that she existed for other people, and that she was not good enough, that she was dirty, and no matter what she did, it would never be enough. I wasn't a good enough mother. I certainly wasn't a good wife. So why am I even here? And working with Tennie and Kim, we began to unpack that. And I learned that I had a tremendous amount of anger, a lot of pent up rage that I hadn't allowed myself to express. And all of that came out while I was at Shades of Hope. And it was scary and terrifying. And I left there very vulnerable. And I didn't know who I was going to be on the other side of it. But through Tennie and Kim's recommendations, I did all of the 90 meetings in 90 days, the 12-step programs, and working the program and talking with other survivors. I was in Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, I can say that, and participated with those groups. And talking with other women that were going through this, I started to see the commonality of our experiences, which where so many of us had been exposed to sex as kids and had been abused or had been assaulted. And those had been these catalytic moments for all of our life's problems. And we were all on those calls just trying to get better. And one of the things that I took away from going to Shades of Hope was that I didn't have that unlocking of truly starting to heal. And I will be honest, I got way worse before I got better. Tennie made me sign a letter to her promising that I wasn't going to take my life. And when I left Shades of Hope. And so I was still very vulnerable. But what I decided to do was I wanted other people to have the experience that I had. And I created the 1 in 3 Foundation. It's named for the World Health Organization statistic that 1 in 3 women in their lifetime will experience sexual or physical violence. And that statistic was so sobering to me that I couldn't imagine that 1 in 3. But we don't talk about it. Nobody was talking about it. I had gone to school and we had done the good touch, bad touch, uh, you know, assemblies, and they had talked about stranger danger and all of these things. But what do you do when that person's in your house? What do you do when it's incest? What about the shame and the guilt that builds from that? No one was talking about that. And I never heard anyone else say, it's happening to me. No one wanted to be the person to say that at school. And I grew up feeling like I was the only girl that went through this. So what I learned in recovery and what I learned through SLAA was that I wasn't, and through that statistic. And so I wanted to bring back some of what I had learned at Shades of Hope to East Texas and offer some body-based healing methods, support groups, to give that to survivors here in our community. We work primarily with women or female identifying persons, but we also support men, and we support the loved ones and care providers of those who are survivors. And through telling my story and through creating the foundation, it continues to help me heal. It continues to help that little girl that, again, didn't feel like she was seen or heard. It helps her, and it helps her feel like she has a seat at the table. What I was doing was already sharing my story so much when I was speaking on behalf of the foundation, when I was going out in public or coordinating events for the foundation. And I started to find so many people were relating to what I was saying. I began to look for a book that was from specifically a woman, a mother, a wife who had struggled with sex addiction and porn addiction, perfectionism as a result of childhood sexual abuse. And I found a lot of, again, self help books, a lot of workbooks, a lot of um, how to's, but not just someone's experience, and authentic and very raw experience. And so ultimately, I wrote the book that I was looking for, and it is the scariest thing that I have ever done. As hard as it was to go to Shades of Hope in Buffalo Gap, Texas, and walk in and accept help from total strangers and give my life over to them for six and a half really full days, writing this memoir forced me to relive that trauma vividly. It forced me to admit to myself the things that I didn't like about myself. It forced me to admit to the wrongs that I had done in my marriage. And it forced me to confront the stigmas and a lot of that anger. And then I put it out in the world. It got published in November, and people are reading it. People are, hey, I want to read your book. I want to support you. People that had watched me on television. Well, that's really great, but it's also terrifying when they had no idea that this was your story. And as someone in the community who had been seen as a community leader, someone who was active at my child's school, all of those things, these were hard details to put out there. You know, my son's principal and his teacher have read the book, and that's a very scary thing for me to think about. A good friend that was a former colleague that actually was a nun at one point in her life wanted to read the book, and I felt I had to give her, all of the content warnings and trigger warnings and say, there's strong language, there's sexual content. And she said, I'm very used to working with the enemy, so it's okay. And what I realized in putting this book out there and sharing my story ultimately was that because I was no longer silencing myself, because I was no longer keeping these things secret, it didn't diminish the shine of my life or any of my achievements, but also I could live without secrets. And there was tremendous freedom that came from that. There's still those moments of feeling shame. There's still those moments of feeling guilt, especially when it comes to relationships. But when you speak up and you speak out, shame loses a lot of its power. And that was where a tremendous part of my life had been affected, because I was shameful. And it was hard for a 5-year-old to wrestle with the fact that this was not her fault, that what was happening to me was not my fault. Somehow along the way, I developed a belief that it was, that if these things kept happening to me, and it wasn't just one person, it was several people, and it kept happening over and over and over. So there must be something wrong with me. There's something wrong with Maya. And all of my work has still been to tell that part of my brain it's a lie, and to say that you're enough, and to wrestle with mental health to now I'm working very hard on dissociative disorder and seeing how easily I slip in and slip out of being present and seeking escape. That's something that I still wrestle with because, again, all of these things developed when I was less than 10 years old. So I can say 43 years old. That's a lot of years of internalizing these things. That's 38 years worth of that way of thinking, trying to unwrap that. But the good thing about our brains is we can reshape what the trauma did. It takes longer, and that's not fair, but we can, and we have to do the work. So ultimately, that I hope from the return trip, that I hope with starting the 1 in 3 Foundation, I hope in sharing my story, is that it just inspires people to seek help and to know that all of those things that we learned about ourselves when we were kids, those things that we told ourselves weren't true. And our lives have been shaped by that trauma, but we don't have to keep going back to it. Tennie and Cam, that's all that I have for right now. Tennie, I think you're muted still.
Yeah, Tennie, you've got to unmute.
There we go. Okay.
All right, thank you so much, Maya. Oh, and on top of everything else, you're a very good speaker. Thank you so much. So how's your life today? I mean, like today, I mean, you still married?
Yes. I have been very fortunate that my husband has been extremely supportive of my healing, supportive of me writing this book, supportive of me writing. I've written articles about online relationships and marriage, and he knows that every time that I do that or that I speak, that it's a form of healing for me. It's also somewhat of a form of accountability. But it doesn't mean that we haven't had our hardships, and it doesn't mean that there aren't moments where those old feelings of resentfulness come up and we talk through it. But I feel very fortunate that I'm married to the person that I'm married to, because I think anybody else probably would have been out the door.
And that does happen. That's one of the reasons